I want you to try something. Close your eyes and imagine watching someone else live your exact life, following your exact daily routines. Would you be impressed or concerned? For most of us, the answer is uncomfortable because we know our habits don't align with our aspirations. The 7 toxic habits I'm about to share aren't just minor inconveniences, the fundamental blockers that prevent meaningful change. Each one creates what psychologists call neural interference patterns that actively resist your attempts to transform. I've documented exactly how these patterns function and, more importantly, how to replace them with their neurological opposites. I want to start by asking you a question that made me uncomfortable for years. If your habits were a person, would you choose them as your life partner? Would you willingly commit to someone who consistently undermines your potential, dismisses your dreams, and quietly sabotages your progress? Most of us are living with toxic neural patterns that systematically dismantle our potential while operating beneath our conscious awareness. They're the silent saboteurs that have taken residence in our brains, becoming so familiar that we've stopped questioning their presence. These aren't just bad behaviors we can simply decide to stop. They're neurologically entrenched patterns that actively resist your attempts to change them. Your brain has literally built physical pathways that make these habits the path of least resistance. The first 3 toxic habits I've identified create a perfect storm of self-sabotage. First, there's endless content consumption without implementation. The constant intake of books, podcasts, and courses while your actual life remains unchanged. Second, perfectionism prevents you from starting anything until conditions are just right, which of course they never are. Third, the comparison trap steals your unique path by convincing you that success must look exactly like someone else's journey. What's happening in your brain when you fall into these patterns is fascinating. Your neural pathways are actually protecting your current identity, even when that identity is holding you back. Your brain doesn't distinguish between helpful and harmful habits. It only recognizes familiar versus unfamiliar patterns. When you attempt to break a toxic habit, your neurological system perceives this as a threat to your established identity and triggers resistance mechanisms to maintain homeostasis. I spent 4 years trapped in these exact patterns, consuming over 200 personal development books, while my actual life remained stagnant. I could eloquently discuss transformation theories and quote every major thought leader, but I wasn't implementing anything meaningful. My knowledge was expanding while my results flatlined. I became what I now call a professional student, someone who masters learning but avoids the discomfort of application. The breakthrough came when I realized these habits weren't personal failings or character flaws, but predictable neurological responses to environmental triggers I could identify and modify. The problem wasn't a lack of information. It was that my brain had formed efficient neural highways for certain behaviors that were now running on autopilot. The solution wasn't more knowledge, but a systematic rewiring of these pathways. What if I told you that identifying these patterns is only 20% of the solution, but that 20% creates the possibility for everything else? Most people never even realize they're caught in these cycles. They simply attribute their lack of progress to external circumstances or personal inadequacy. But once you can name these patterns and recognize them as they emerge, you've created the critical awareness gap that makes transformation possible. The first step to breaking free is recognizing the exact moment these habits activate, installing what I call a neural alarm system that catches them before they take over your behavior. This alarm system functions through conscious pattern interruption. When you feel the urge to consume more content instead of implementing what you already know, your neural alarm activates, creating a moment of choice where autopilot previously ruled. When perfectionism begins its familiar whisper that you're not ready yet, the alarm sounds, giving you the opportunity to override the pattern. But recognition alone won't create lasting change. This is where most transformation attempts fail. Knowing the pattern exists doesn't automatically rewrite the neural pathways that have been strengthening for years. To create real change, we need to understand the remaining 4 toxic habits and the replacement behaviors that neutralize them at their source. These habits form an interconnected system that maintains your current state despite your conscious desire for growth. The interconnected system of habits maintaining your current state operates through 4 additional toxic patterns that silently neutralize your efforts to change. Each time you've tried and failed to transform wasn't because of personal weakness. It was because you were targeting the symptoms rather than restructuring the underlying neural architecture that keeps these patterns in place. Let me introduce you to the 4 remaining toxic habits: reactive decision-making, identity-level resistance, environmental enablers, and the absence of immediate consequences. Together, these form the invisible cage that keeps you trapped in cycles of unfulfilled potential. Reactive decision-making occurs when your choices are dictated by immediate circumstances rather than aligned with your deeper goals. It's like driving with your eyes fixed just 3 feet ahead of your car. You'll react to every bump but miss the cliff a mile down the road. This is why most people find themselves consistently putting out fires instead of building the life they actually want. But the most insidious of these patterns is identity-level resistance. This was my greatest stumbling block. Every time I tried to adopt new behaviors, my brain would trigger what psychologists call identity homeostasis, a powerful neurological defense mechanism designed to maintain your current self-concept, even when that self-concept is holding you back. Your brain literally treats identity change as a form of death and mobilizes powerful resources to prevent it. When I would sit down to implement a new behavior, like writing consistently instead of just reading about writing, my mind would flood with uncomfortable sensations. Anxiety, boredom, and an overwhelming urge to check my phone weren't random distractions. They were my brain's strategic attempts to protect my existing identity as a consumer rather than a creator. The third toxic habit involves your environmental enablers, the physical and digital spaces engineered to reinforce your current patterns. Your environment isn't neutral. It's either working for or against your growth. The notification systems on your devices, the layout of your home, even the people you spend time with, all these elements conspire to maintain your status quo. The final habit, the absence of immediate consequences, explains why these patterns persist despite your conscious desire to change. Toxic habits rarely punish you in the moment. Their devastating effects accumulate invisibly over time, making them particularly difficult to associate with their eventual outcomes. Traditional approaches to habit change fail because they rely almost exclusively on willpower, a finite resource that depletes rapidly when confronted with identity-level resistance. But neuroplasticity research reveals a counterintuitive truth. Effective transformation requires creating a vacuum where the old behavior existed before attempting to introduce its replacement. This is why I developed the 21-day Neural Rewiring Protocol. It works in 3 distinct phases that align with how your brain naturally forms new neural pathways. Days 1 through 7 focus on pattern interruption. During this phase, you'll install specific neurological circuit breakers that disrupt toxic habits at their trigger points. This doesn't require adding complicated routines. Instead, you'll learn to recognize and redirect the initial neural sparks before they become behavioral flames. Days 8-14 concentrate on identity recalibration. Here, you'll systematically expose yourself to small evidence that contradicts your limiting self-concept. Each completion of a tiny implementation task rewires your identity from someone who doesn't follow through to someone who takes consistent action. Days 15 to 21 involve environmental reconstruction. You'll strategically redesign your physical and digital spaces to make toxic habits require conscious effort while making growth behaviors the path of least resistance. The most powerful technique within this protocol. The one that creates a domino effect on all others is what I call implementation windows. These are 30-minute periods where you do nothing but implement what you've already learned. No consumption, no planning, no preparation, just pure application. This single practice neutralizes the knowledge action gap that keeps most people stuck in permanent student mode. What makes this approach radically different is that it doesn't add more to your already overwhelmed schedule. Instead, it strategically removes the interference patterns that block your natural drive toward growth. And let me be absolutely clear about something. These 7 toxic habits weren't installed by you. They emerged from a complex interplay of social conditioning, environmental cues, and neurological efficiency. But here's where your power lies. Their removal falls squarely on your shoulders. When you finally extract these patterns from your operating system, you'll witness transformation that extends far beyond productivity into relationships, creative expression, and your fundamental sense of possibility. The real question facing you isn't about capability. Your brain's neuroplasticity guarantees you can change. The true decision is whether you're willing to endure the temporary identity vacuum that occurs when familiar patterns dissolve before new ones fully form. This discomfort gap, this necessary void, is what most people can't tolerate long enough for lasting change to take root. Begin today by dismantling just one habit. Challenge your identity resistance. Notice how quickly the other 6 patterns start to weaken in response. One strategic intervention creates a cascade effect through your entire habit ecosystem. Your future self is waiting on the other side of this decision.